I think it's really interesting the way you're thinking about being subluxated as a state.
That might be the greatest research gap on chiropractic.
So there is a maximum computational capacity within the central nervous system.
Proprioception kicks on this integrative state.
In a way, I didn't have an ego tied up in the answer. I just wanted to understand.
It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. B.J. Palmer.
Welcome to this special episode of Inventing Chiropractic with David and Alex, or Alex and David, to be polite. And today we have a very special guest that needs completely no introduction. She is known for her amazing efforts in chiropractic research and is one of the leading figures, if not the leading figure of chiropractic research. I'm talking about, I like how you smile, Heidi. I'm talking about the wonderful Heidi Haavik. Welcome, Heidi. I'm so glad that you made it. What gave you the idea, the drive, the motivation to one day open your eyes and say something like, hey, in the world of chiropractic that is pretty much driven by tradition and even mythical concepts, I will become a researcher and add a little bit of reality to this world. What gave you this motivation? What was your drive? What was your deep me that brought you to this point? Please tell us about yourself.
Thank you, David and Alex, for having me here. My initial drive with the research was that I have always been very curious, and even after I graduated as a chiropractor, I still had gone back to Auckland University and was studying additional papers just for fun. I know that's very sad, but you might understand me on that. Just because I was fascinated by things, and I bumped into my science lecturer, Bernadette Murphy, who's now Professor Bernadette Murphy, and she asked me, well, if I was wanting to do some postgraduate research, why not join her and do neuroscience research? Well, I thought I wasn't smart enough. I'm like, no, I can't do that, Benny. I can't do brain science. Are you crazy? That's for smart people. She goes, no, I remember you from school. You're smart. That's fine. You can do it. And then my only ambition when I started that postgraduate program was, okay, well, if I could actually help Bernadette Murphy, because you realize she was one of the absolute pioneers. I think she was the first ever in 1995 to publish the H-reflex study, so showing that there was an effect on the nervous system. That's Bernadette Murphy. And here I was thinking, okay, I'll do my postgraduate work with her, and I'll just be her research assistant and help her, make some discoveries. I'll work in the background in her lab, and stage? Are you kidding me? Present?
Yes.
I don't think so. I wanted to be in the background. But as I started my PhD work, so I first did a postgraduate diploma with her, and I was quite good at it, funnily enough. I got straight A's across about 4 different departments, and I thought, maybe I can do this, maybe.
Yes.
And then I started my PhD, David, and even in those first studies in my PhD, we saw that we were changing the brain. And that, of course, was a complete flip of reality as we knew it as chiropractors at the time. So I knew, I was breastfeeding my brand new baby girl, Sophie. My little toddler was running around at home. I remember days in at the university on a weekend so that my husband could look after my 3-year-old son, Stefan. And I was literally rocking her bassinet and dealing with data on the computer, seeing subjects for the studies. It's a vivid memory. And looking at that screen, seeing the changes, not at the spinal cord level, not at the brainstem level, but at the cortical level, going, oh my goodness, this is one day going to change the way we view what chiropractic is.
Yes.
At this stage, Bernadette Murphy leaves the country. She goes back to Canada. Now, you can't do research out of your garage, right? Like out of your garage. You actually have to be at an institution. So I was going to have to give up on doing this research, knowing that we had literally discovered something that's going to change a whole profession.
Yes.
And so this is when I was offered the job as the research director initially at the New Zealand College of Chiropractic. And I was like, well, I either have to give this up or I've got to take that job. Again, I thought I'm not qualified, I'm not good enough, I haven't even got my PhD yet. Research director, it's a far too big a job. But, as you know, history. I said yes, I took the job, and it has just skyrocketed. So honestly, those first few years having to present on stage, I was just about vomiting in the pot plants before I went on stage. I was so nervous, I didn't know what to do with myself. But now it's taken over my life. Like, I know that the research we're doing can change lives. It's all those people that really deserve to have access to chiropractic care that don't yet get it. And that's the big why for me and the drive. It's like, I don't care now about politics and about crap from this side or that end. I'm like, bugger you guys. It's the people out there that deserve access. And I know my work, our work that, I now have got about 35 people working just in the research centre at the New Zealand College of Chiropractic. I think we're the largest research centre on the planet, which is pretty cool,
Yes,
and so
it is.
I know that this work is changing the world, and I'm delighted about it. My biggest thing now is to translate it, which is why when you asked me to come on your podcast, I was like, absolutely, it ticks all the boxes. Translating chiropractic neuroscience to make it understandable to not just the chiropractors, but even the public is, again, that's literally what I live for.
Yes, I guess. You answered that question already, but what were the key stepstones? If somebody who listens to this podcast episode says, hey, I want to be a researcher like Heidi Haavik. I really want to be there if maybe Heidi Haavik quits. Yeah, I want to carry on the torch. What would be the key stepstones, the key concepts, the key idea? What would be the prerequisites one needs, and what would be the mistakes one should avoid? What was your career? Tell us about that.
The key ingredients is you've got to be a little bit crazy and mix in an insane passion or need to understand, because that drive is got to be there, and it's got to be constant, and you've got to be tenacious. Like, you need to, after problem after problem after problem, you've got to keep going and keep going and keep going. So I'd say those are the three ingredients. But right from the beginning, David, when we saw those changes, and what we were doing then was somatosensory evoked potentials. So we were stimulating the median nerve at the wrist, and then we were recording how it was crossing the peripheral, the brachial plexus, and then we could measure how interneurons at the spinal cord level were communicating about that stimulated information. And then from the scalp electrodes, we could record the brainstem and how it was communicating about this stimulus, and then the cortex. We only had 5 channels. I mean, you should see the old dinosaur of a bioamplifier that I recorded my PhD on. She was literally meant to be thrown in the tip, but like Bernadette Murphy, she saved it, and so I have it now in my lab. We call her the dinosaur Frankenstein. But anyway, I only had 5 channels of EEG, and there were no changes at the brainstem level. There were no changes in the spinal cord, in the spinal cord of the brainstem, but there were lasting changes up in the cortex. So then I had to okay, well, what does that mean? After chiropractic adjustments of the spine, of subluxations in the spine, the brain is now processing proprioceptive information, which like messages about how your muscles are moving and where they are, differently. So if that's the case, then, is it a good thing? And so then we measured the joint position sense. So we were measuring elbow joint position sense, before and after adjusting, and showed that, we improve the brain's accuracy of knowing where the arm is. So then we're like, well, this should probably change the way the brain sends messages back to the muscles. And that's where I started with the TMS. So, it was following the story. You're following the data. So there's a story behind every single study we did. Getting Kamal getting to do those strength studies, the maximum voluntary contraction studies, That was because with the TMS, with the transcranial magnetic stimulation, you set up a magnetic field that goes into the brain, and that can then excite little neurons within the brain, which then send messages down to your muscles. So one of the things we found was the little motor evoked potentials didn't change, but this thing called a cortical silent period did. And like, honestly, I had to then go back and study, just like you. I'm like, what the fuck is a cortical silent period?
Yes.
Excuse the French.
Yes.
Yes. What's the cortical silent? So then I was reading about that, and I came across Kamal Turka, and he is an expert in TMS. And he had specifically shown, because the neuroscientists around the planet used to think that this cortical silent period was an inhibition. It's a bit like your brain has got gas pedals and handbrakes to every muscle in your body, and varying those, would vary things like how strong you are, how much fatigue you have, and all that sort of stuff. But Kamal had shown with this technique where you stick a little needle with a little thin fine wire inside the muscle tissue, you can actually record from individual motor unit, which basically is the muscle that one alpha motor neuron connects to. I know you understand. I'm talking for your audience there.
Yes, totally. I understand.
So then we did. So I kept talking to Kamal every neuroscience conference I went to, because I just want to understand this cortical silent period change, which for most chiropractors is like, well, so what? But if we skip forward 10 years, well, then I've managed to get Kamal out to New Zealand. He's now come multiple times to New Zealand. We've gone to Turkey, to his lab at Koç University at the time, multiple times as well. And what we found was it's not an inhibitory phenomena. What we're doing when we're adjusting is we make the brain more efficiently able to produce force. So if you think about the handbrake gas pedal analogy, when we're adjusting subluxations, it's like we release the handbrake and we push on the gas pedal a little bit more from the brain to those muscles. And it just got more and more exciting. So we kept doing them. All these studies that you're talking about, it all followed on from, well, what does that mean then? Well, what does that mean then? Well, does this help people? Like, even I'm sure you've got multiple questions, but you've got me on a roll here. Like, Kamal then, when we started doing those maximum strength studies and the V-wave, showing that it's the volitional drive from the brain to the muscle that's increasing, we then did it in elite sports athletes, because we first did it in college students, just chiro students at our college, and they got 16% stronger and less fatigue. And I'm like, well, that's a big deal. That must matter to sports people, right? So we got these elite Olympic taekwondo athletes in, and it still happened in them. 8% in elite Olympic athletes. That's massive. Not only were our participants getting stronger, but they were also not getting fatigued. And the reason that's quite relevant is if you think of an athlete, right, they're contracting their muscles over and over and over again, maximally, if they're really high performers. And in the control experiment, they weren't having no changes, they were actually fatiguing, which really told us that they were really trying their maximum efforts, right? Because if you contract your muscles over and over again at the maximum voluntary contraction rate, you will by definition fatigue them. And that was not happening. So there's no difference between the groups. They're all doing those maximum contractions, and not only are they not fatiguing, but they're getting 8% stronger. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
It is natural steroids.
Yes.
Let's come back to a topic that chiropractors, and I know that the world of chiropractic tries to avoid that topic. It is a matter of fact that pain is a very, very important driver for patients to come into the office, of course. Nobody says, hey, I want to be stronger. Hey, I want to have more cognitive ability. Hey, I want to sleep better. Hey, I want to whatever. There are so many things.
Hopefully they will say that after they've talked to you though, David.
Hopefully,
right?
yeah. Hopefully. It is our objective to sensitize people for that. But I think, honestly, that I never had a patient that says, hey, David, I have no problem at all. I just want to sleep better. And this is the reason why I come to a chiropractor's office. The only reason that happens is because somebody from my office told somebody that that could happen?
What you don't get enough credit for, Heidi, is like the patients or the participants you selected for studies. How you found out that they are subclinical neck pain people that don't have pain when you do the study with them, but they do sometimes, and how effective chiropractic. Please tell me. Please.
Can I share why? Because
of course,
like David began with, it's actually due to the problem or the confounding effect of pain. Because we knew right from those early studies we were changing the brain. Well,
yes.
Pain or feelings of pain just are so well known to change brain function. We know that.
Okay.
We know, and again, I'll come back to pain because I am fascinated by it. The changes in understanding of what pain is has completely changed in the last 20 years. And I think it's really sad the chiropractic profession doesn't embrace it because it's actually fascinating. And not only that, the research around pain fits like a hand in a glove with the research around the subluxation and the effects of the adjustment. But let's go back to those populations because it's so exciting. So
yes.
I knew that if I was measuring brain function, I what typically happens when a chiropractor sees a patient in pain? Well, their pain levels change. Well, if their pain levels change, that alone could change brain function. So there wouldn't be a reviewer on the planet that would let me argue that the adjustment was changing brain. They would say, no, the adjustment might just be changing pain, and then the pain is changing the brain. And I'm like, and then I also had the opposite problem. So because of that, I started with asymptomatic people. I started looking at people that had no symptoms.
Yes.
But then you would not believe, like in those early days, I mean, how many chiropractic neurophysiologists do you think there was on the planet at that stage? Maybe 4, 5? We're talking the early 2000s. There wasn't many of us. So you couldn't get a reviewer. Like we had neurosurgeons and neuroscientists that were actually reviewing these papers because we always published in the neuroscience journals to make sure that we had the methodologies so that chiropractors can trust our results. You need to get the neuroscientists reviewing the methodology. So anyway, again and again and again, we had so much trouble with neurosurgeons. They outright said it. I don't believe that you can palpate dysfunction in the cervical spine. I'm like, we're the third largest health profession on the planet, and you're telling me you don't believe that we can do what we do, that we do all day, every day. And like, I mean, belief shouldn't come into a scientific review, but it did again and again. So I was like so fed up by this. I couldn't have people in pain. I couldn't do asymptomatics because they could not understand. That was the other problem. Not only did they not believe we could do what we could do, but they couldn't believe why we were applying an intervention to an asymptomatic, a clinical intervention, adjusting the spine to a healthy population. Like, well, what's the point? So I'm like, oh God, even though we described in full paragraphs what the subluxation was, what that dysfunction in the spine was, they couldn't get their head around it. So I came across papers in the literature talking about this by Lee et al. There's several of them. It's quite an awesome work where they'd looked at this category called subclinical pain, and I'm sitting there looking at it. So you have to have reoccurring ache, pain, or tension. You haven't sought any treatment for it yet. You can have had a previous accident or not. And the key factor is that you don't have pain on the day of the study. I mean, I could have kissed the person across, the internet. I mean, I was like, I literally celebrated with champagne. And so we started our first studies because all I need to do is race up to some of my students. Hey, have you ever had any ache, pain, or tension in your spine? And they're like, yeah. And you haven't sought any treatment for it? No. I don't care if you've had an accident because it doesn't matter. And do you have pain today? No. Great, come into the lab. And I was like delighted. Yeah. But the issue then, which was really interesting, is we came across people that said, no, I've never had any pain or ache or tension.
Yes.
And I'm like, are you lying to me? How can you never have had it? And they're like, no, never. I've never had any ache, pain or tension in my life ever. And I'm like, I can't believe you're real. So we literally rung up the ethics committee, because you have to do ethics, so you can't do your experiments. So I literally rang up the ethics committee and said, can I include a healthy comparison group? And that was the 2011 elbow joint position sense. It was the first time we ever did it. And from then on, David and Alex, I've never had a problem with reviewers criticizing, that I'm applying an intervention to a asymptomatic population.
When we read your studies, we thought, fucking hell, she found out what it means scientifically to be subluxated. So what we did was we just recruited those patients who had exactly this problem and found out that when we adjusted them, that those are the bangers, that those are the people who came up with the craziest wonders. Did you realize that yourself, that it makes a huge difference that you adjust exactly those? Because it felt a little bit when you said it like an accident that this worked, because we thought, fuck, this is what it means to be subluxated, and this is exactly what BJ always talked about.
Two things that come to my mind when you're saying this. One is the pain factor, and one is this category, because the category talks a bit about the timeline of how long you've been subluxated for. So that's how I think about it, because if you got subluxated today, I think that's just a confused nervous system. And this ties into what pain is, because pain isn't a nociceptive detection warning system, eh? And I'm not talking necessarily to you guys, I'm talking to your listeners. We know for a fact now that feeling pain, is a danger warning system. Yeah. Danger warning system, not tissue pathology warning system, not injury. I mean, it could be an injury, because an injury would set off danger warning signals, but there's so many experiments that show now that you can feel pain. Like Candice McCabe did this study where she had people moving their right arm, but she covered the arm and had a mirror up. So what they were looking at, it looked like their left arm was moving, totally asymptomatic people. They were moving their right arm, but their visual system, their eyes were telling their brain that their left arm was moving. So it's incongruent messages coming to the brain, right? Their visual system is saying my left arm's moving. Their actual right arm was saying my right arm's moving. 66% of completely healthy, asymptomatic people ended up with symptoms. And that could be numbness, tingling, pain. Yes way. So to me, pain can be evoked from not knowing what's going on. Like, what do you think a subluxation is? It's the brain not getting messages about one part of the spine. Give that a bit of time. And that to me is exactly the same as Candice McCabe. It's a confused brain, and the brain goes, I'm not sure what's going on. I'm just going to switch on my pain system. And it's so interesting. So if you were subluxated today, you've got the neural problem. But 2 years from today, we know those little muscles around the subluxated area, they atrophy, they shrink, they become stiff, fibrotic. We know the stretch receptors, the muscle spindles, even their morphology changes, their shape changes. We change fiber type. So all of these changes over time. So if you've got someone right out here in chronic pain versus, someone that got subluxated today, huge difference. So what do we normally see? Before they're completely fucked up in the chronic stage, we see the subclinical people. They're the ones that we can make the biggest change to. Now, that was a complete accident, Alex. I mean, I was literally just getting so sick of these reviewers saying, why are you applying a clinical intervention to an asymptomatic population? I couldn't take it anymore. So that's why we started doing that. But now I see it as the stages of subluxation, and we can make the biggest impact, the fastest, on these people that are just developing the problems. Because what we now know we do when we adjust a subluxated segment, you've got to apply the thrust at the subluxated segment, which is a problem with that study. What if their subluxation was an upper cervical subluxation, not a sacroiliac? So if they're just manipulating the sacroiliac, they're not looking for the problem. And we've got to assess the spine. And anyway, what happens when we apply that thrust at the subluxated segment, it wakes the brain up from its story. And it genuinely pays attention and resets whatever it's got wrong. And herein lies the beauty. That's where the magic happens. It's the brain going, shit, what's going on? This is an unusual volley of information coming from one area that I haven't heard from for a long time. Crap, I've been doing that wrong, and I've been doing that wrong. I've got to change this, and I've got to change that, which is why patients can have such a wide variety of changes, because it depends what that, not knowing what's going on in the brain was causing symptom-wise. So one person can get an upper cervical adjustment and they sleep better. Another person can get rid of their knee pain. Another person can, come off their blood pressure medication because the brain goes, oh shit, I've just been not organizing my blood pressure appropriately. So it's so fascinating. And in the last 20 years, the understanding of pain has completely changed. Now we know for a fact it's a danger warning system, and it becomes part of the brain's story about what is reality for you. So you could have an accident, and then when you're in an accident, you're also in that alert state, but it takes a lot of energy. So the brain can't continue it. So if you don't get rid of it quickly and you don't resolve the issues and reset the whole problem, heal the tissues, it becomes embedded in what's called the default mode network, which is your brain's story about your reality. And it's not necessarily real. That's the fascinating part. So trying to get rid of the brain's story of what's going on, I think you need to bring awareness back. And I think that's exactly what we do with an adjustment, and not just an adjustment. Think of exercise. What's that? That's your muscles sending contraction messages to the brain over and over again. What about acupuncture? It's bringing awareness to a certain part of the body. Like, it makes sense from multiple different professions' point of view. But so this whole thing, I've been fascinated with pain right from the beginning, David, and it's like, I don't understand why chiropractors are worried about it or don't want to talk about it.
Yes.
I think maybe it's come from the drive that we were meant to just be biomechanical pain relievers. But that's bullshit. I mean, we're just so far from that, which, like I've seen studies where they were looking at, and they were concluding, these were academics, they were going, and our study showed that chiropractic care does not help knee pain. And I put my hand up and I said, well, what was the chiropractic care? Can you guess what the chiropractic care was that proved that chiropractic didn't fix knee pain? Knee manipulation. And I said, and what?
Yeah.
Oh no, knee manipulation. That was our intervention. I said, okay, that's fine. But can you change your conclusion, please, and say that knee manipulation does not fix knee pain? Because it's not chiropractic care. Many of us would actually check and adjust the spine. Because where does that leg attach? It doesn't float in thin air. It actually attaches to your spine, So if you don't know where your core of your body is, where that leg attaches, you can't send the right messages to those knee muscles.
Yes.
So that's where you can have these micro traumas and, ongoing issues for years and years and years, unless you address the core.
Can the status of being subluxated, or what is the origin? Is it trauma to the spine, or could it as well be a dysfunction or stupidity of the brain, or the autonomic networks of the brain, caused by, and D'Angelo and Casali said it in a study from Alex? I don't know. Yes, don't matter. I don't know. D'Angelo and Casali. Could it be that the complex,
I know what you mean.
The status of being subluxated,
cerebellar framework,
could originate in the brain, or could it be both?
Okay, so I'm hearing three things there that I want to address. I'll answer your subluxation. How do we get subluxated? I like your thinking. I think it's really interesting the way you're thinking about being subluxated as a state, because I agree with you on that. So then, I was looking at, okay, well, what might set up the state? So we've proposed in the 2021 European Journal of Applied Physiology invited review, which is as high up as you get in the basic science world, because the basic science that looks at mechanisms, it doesn't live in the clinical world. So we can't do a systematic review. I mean, that would be stupid. Duh. Because it's a different type of research. We're not looking at the effects of an intervention for a health outcome. That's the clinical research realm. So we're looking at mechanisms. So the highest you can get there, if there was a pyramid, would be an invited review from a physiology journal. Because, hey, they recognize us as experts in the field, and we wrote this review. It ended up really good, way better than I even actually originally, we originally wrote it. So the review process was phenomenal. So what we looked at then is what might set off this state, right? Because something has to kind of set it off. And I like your question about, is it physical or is it above C1? And what we found, information in the literature, we found that there's a lot of information of physical trauma. So Paul Hodges and them have done some amazing work looking at injuring the disc and spinal injuries, and so there's a ton of research that shows that's for sure physical injury. But we also came across, and this was thanks to the review process. I have a sneaky feeling that Paul Hodges was one of the reviewers because he was sort of directing it.
Yes, Paul. Yeah, it's one of the most.
I mean, he's a really amazing.
Yes,
but
I
anyway,
have his book, Spinal Rehabilitation. Very interesting. Yeah.
Oh, he's phenomenal. But anyway,
Yes.
he was sort of talking about, well, what about the state of the patient? And what we then looked at, and I went into deep dive into, I also found this. Have you seen the book by Lorimer Moseley and David Burke on Explain Pain? It's actually a really, really good textbook for you listeners
I have
out
it
there.
in my library. Yeah.
The only sad thing about it is that Lorimer Moseley and David Burke don't seem to value chiropractors, and that's quite obvious in the book. So other than that, it would have been fantastic to give to patients. But on page 90, and it's really sad that I know this, Alex, yes, but on page 90, they literally write about, this is a public book, they write that when you go into fight and flight, the little muscles around your spine get switched off because you don't need them if you are facing a saber-toothed tiger. You just need all your energy and blood sent to your big muscles for fight or flight, to live, to survive. So I was like, wow. So I've tried to dig into the literature and find where this has originally come from. I've even talked to Paul Hodges about it, and he said he doesn't know, but he knows that Lorimer Moseley did that work. And David Burke and Lorimer Moseley are very, very reputable neurophysiologists and scientists. So I believe them. Like I don't doubt it for a second. I'm still just trying to locate the original research. So David, I'll give you that as a little task to do after today. But so they said fight and flight also switches those muscles off. Physical trauma switches those little muscles off. Emotional trauma, going into fight and flight, switches them off. So there's your answer. Both physical input can switch those little muscles off and set off a subluxated state, but so too can going into fight and flight. Now that's happening out here. That's not physically happening. And we found another thing that brings us right back full circle back to low back pain, I think, and I'll share that with you. We also found that local inflammation can also switch those little muscles off. So there's some evidence for that too, which I thought was really interesting. Because I don't know about you, but have you ever seen patients that have like a tooth abscess? Like they're constantly subluxated upper cervically. Like you adjust them and then adjust them and adjust them, and it just doesn't feel right. They just resubluxate again and again. And then you send them to the dentist, they resolve their tooth abscess, and they're back to normal function again. And I want to ask you a question now, both of you. This is a real trick question. It's not really, but this is a real question too. What do you think physically is right in front of and around the lumbar spine? Anatomically, what's right in front of and around the lumbar spine that can cause a shit ton of inflammation? Our bowels.
Our bowels. All right.
Leaky gut syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, and it causes a lot of inflammation. I think this is one of the main reasons the lower back is so difficult to rehabilitate or to get better, because we can adjust them and adjust them and adjust them and it comes back again and again and again. But if they've got, and like how many people don't have upset tummies now, right? Loads do. And if that's causing local inflammation, well then they're just going to resubluxate again and again.
But what's interesting, Heidi, a very interesting part is that what I know is the brain-gut axis is a very important, is a very important thing. And this is not my idea. I'm quoting Datis Karazian here. I read a lot and also a lot of studies about the brain-gut axis. And what I also know is the lumbar spine is a very difficult thing to regulate for the brain. Huge parts of the cerebellum are concerned with the lumbar spine, and the lumbar spine does really a lot of contribution to general stability of the human body. So let's just assume that, for example, the foods we take in disturb the brain-gut axis and the brain gets disturbed by that. I mean, the body is one unit. Could it be that low back pain can be some kind of a warning signal? I mean, you answered that already. And that contributes to this idea of being subluxated as a status, not as a bone out of place, but being subluxated as a status of the human body is a warning signal of the entirety of life. And yes,
and what was really fascinating
Yes.
too on my research journey, right? It's been since the early 2000s. It's been 26 years now, because I graduated in '99, and so I continued straight
Yes.
away. So along this journey, I started to go to neuroscience conferences. So I've been going to the big Society for Neuroscience in America, where there's 35,000 scientists, usually, give or take a few thousand come. And
Yes.
so I've been going to that for over 20 years. And 20 years ago, I will tell you, there was nothing about the gut. Nothing.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
if anyone asked a question about the gut, they were like, you're in the wrong conference. Go to the gastroenterology conference,
Yes.
please.
Yeah.
This is neuroscience. But now, like the last time I went in Chicago, which was just pre-COVID, I mean, I've been since too, but that one struck me so dramatically. The two major changes that I noticed, actually three major changes. One was childhood trauma and how childhood trauma changes the brain. Two was glial cells. You know, we actually used to think glial cells were the little helper cells and the feeder cells and the scaffolding cells. Well, it turns out now they're driving the show. They drive plasticity, growth, changes, the degree of connections. It's insane. And the third one is the gut-brain connection, and how if you change the gut, you're changing the brain. Unbelievable. And I now have colleagues where I can actually run a study. I just need the money. I just need to raise the money for it. To literally, we've got microbiome experts that we can actually work with, so we could actually run a proper study like that. But can I just squeeze in two more things? So yes, I fully agree with you. I think that inflammation around the lumbar spine can resubluxate us, plus the status of the gut is also going to change brain function in a negative way. So if you've got bad gut bowels function, that's also going to change the brain, but the little muscles are also going to keep turning off, so the brain doesn't get information from the lower back. So to me, that's a double whammy, and it sort of screws things up. But you mentioned also autonomic nervous system, and I would like to touch on that. But the other thing you mentioned is hemisphericity, and I've got a bit of a peeve with that one, because I have measured in real time brain function in real time, like with functional near infrared spectrometry, where we can actually look at the blood oxygenation changes, like before, during, and after an adjustment.
Okay.
And we're also, have measured like almost immediately after. I mean, it takes about 5 minutes though with the EEG, right? So that's a little bit slower.
Yes, of course. Of course, yeah.
You have brain changes all over the brain. Like, it's far too naive to think that if I adjust from one side,
naive.
I'm affecting the opposite side of the cortex. And I just want to point that out there, because I know there's a lot of chiropractors that are only adjusting from one side because they're wanting to affect the opposite cortex.
Yes,
No. Please don't
normal,
think that adjusting from one side of the spine affects the same side cerebellum or the opposite cortex. Please just
exactly
that's just the pathway. But you forget then that as soon as it arrives at the cortex or the cerebellum, immediately it's discussed. And that's all over the brain.
There are way more pathways between both hemispheres than between the body and the brain. It is a huge network.
Check out our latest, one of our latest publications, which was the 4-week clinical trial in the UK, and we looked at functional connectivity and the default mode network. So that's pre and post 1 session and pre and post 4 weeks, and you look at the connections. They're cross hemispheres. They're the front, the back, the side to side. It's all over the show, and I think it's just it's okay. It's just a simplified view that could have had merit. But there's no evidence that supports the hemisphericity. And what we're now looking at is these functional network connections. Because you've got to start thinking about, sensory information comes in, but the pathway is just a highway. It's not where the guts of things happen. It's what happens after the information arrives at the brain that it gets really interesting, because this is where the brain decides, is this relevant to me? Is this a danger? Should I worry about this? What do I feel about this? What do I think about this? What should I do about this? And that's where all of the and remember when we did the early PhD research, my first study, when we started the conversation, and we found because I was literally then sending information from the wrist up across the brachial network into the spinal cord, up through the brainstem and to the cortex. And yes, we found changes in the primary sensory cortex, but the biggest, most lasting changes have been in the N30 when you've got that early sensory motor integration
Yes.
where the brain's thinking, what does this sensory information mean and what do I need to do about it? Because we've done other studies and we haven't shown N20 changes, but we always, and we've done it about 5, 6, 7 studies now, always find the N30, which is that early integration. What does this mean? What do I do about it? And what's getting really interesting now, because that was 25 years ago again, now we're doing these other areas and we can start looking at the whole cortex, and we also know the brain doesn't just think, what is this sensory information and what motor output should I give? We also know that it starts thinking about, what does this mean to me? What do I feel about it? What do I think about it? And how does this change my reality and my understanding of who I am and how I fit into the world and how I function? And now it's getting interesting. But honestly, I'll tell you, I've never studied so hard in my life as I have these last couple of years when we got into this network, the functional connectivity research with whole head EEG. Like, I've got the most brilliant, amazing EEG and bioengineers as part of my research team. Like, Usman Ghani's doing this phenomenal work on this functional connectivity, and I literally sit and like pick his brain apart. I'm like, but how do you know that? How sure are you that that's the case? And he will like argue and defend it. And so it's amazing. And Imran Khan Niazi, we can't finish this talk off without, if it wasn't for that man, I wouldn't have done 3/4 of what I've achieved. Is thanks to it's the team. It's not me. I just happen to be the voice piece. But it is unbelievable how the brain interprets its reality differently, and that's across the brain. And it's okay that we thought something was, different and now have been proven wrong. That's the whole point of science, right? Is that we can come together and we tested the philosophy and it was, slightly different, but it's not quite correct. But the latest research is indicating that this theory is most correct. And what does that mean to you clinicians? And it's a wonderful, discussion that we should have together. Like, I'll never knock a technique person. Like, clinically, their adjustments may be phenomenal, and I won't ever knock that side of it. The only thing I would question is what's actually going on and the reason that they're having such a good effect.
Why do you think that chiropractic clinicians tend to, are drawn to these oversimplified concepts?
I honestly think that it's overwhelming to be a clinician. I've been a clinician. I practiced for over 10 years. As I was starting my research career, I was still practicing and 2 kids, and it's very overwhelming. One of the most overwhelming reasons is that patients don't read the pathology textbooks. For goodness sake, they don't come in with nice, clear-cut things that are going on in the body. It's confusing as hell. And you never really know, and how do you communicate this best to your patient? And because you can make a difference, but how do you say it in a way that they'll hear you? It is overwhelming. Like, it's almost easier for us scientists, which is why I will not knock a clinician, because I think they have the toughest job. I deal with facts, David. It's simple. It's right or wrong. It could be that we've designed the study wrong, and we can talk about that too, because that's a whole nother thing, but if you're finding the same study again, and different study, and a different study, and a different study, different techniques, all saying the same thing, there's a right and wrong. But the poor clinicians out there, they don't have that. So I think it's easiest for them if they can just have a simple explanation, which is why I put so much effort and time into translating the science, and even though it's quite complex, trying to make a simple story out of it. Like, you don't have to go into all the details, but knowing that those little muscles around the spine, the deep ones that go between individual vertebrae, knowing that their communication with the brain enables the brain to know where the core of the body is, so then it can send right messages to arms and legs and spine. And knowing that can matter because we know that the areas in the brain that we impact from adjustments are also linked with the autonomic nervous system, with the limbic system, with the, voluntary central nervous system. So we know we're impacting the whole cortex. We even know now from our latest randomized control trial that we're impacting BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which
Yes.
is literally the higher that gets, the healthier the brain is. You know, and it's unbelievable. And all the immune markers that we're changing shows that we are improving sort of antioxidant effects and oxygenation. We've even done a gene study expression. You know, when the genes get turned on and off, that hasn't been published yet, so that's kind of like literally hot off the press. Where again, and it's not just one or two genes that are like throwing the whole thing. No. We've got a whole set of genes that are for optimizing oxygenation and for optimizing antioxidant function. And so we know we're impacting the stress system, we know we're impacting immune system, we know we're impacting emotional systems, limbic systems, and we know we're impacting all of these systems. But you don't have to know the detail. The simple story is those little muscles communicate with the brain. The brain doesn't understand what's going on when that communication isn't there, so it can't control the body appropriately. Makes logical sense. Even lay public get this. It's not it's our job to understand the details and argue it with neurophysiologists and scientists all around the world, because then all they can walk away with is the simple story, but a story that's biologically correct and backed by science. And I think those two facts are very, very important. So if you are listening and you're still talking about squash nerve roots, please look, there's such a library of research. Like, I've even created an entire library of classes called Chiro's Academy that's got all of this science, well, a shit ton of it. And I've created a whole nother resource library called chiroshub.com, where it's all the patient information. We've even translated quite a lot of that to German, Alex. But if you want a job translating some more, you know, I might have to have a little chat to you about that, because it's so essential that patients get this information in their own language and in a language that makes sense.
I'm one of your customers.
Bless you, I didn't know that. Oh, I'm shocked.
But Heidi,
do you guys know of the platinum? Yeah. Do you guys know of the platinum level membership?
No.
Because
Yes,
I only just recently figured it out that, like, there are people out there that actually would like to learn from me. I mean, you just don't think like that. So what I've done now is I've created a platinum level membership where, again, like, I put you through a program, and every couple of months I come on live and we have, you know, discussions, questions, answers. I tend to, you know, on Zoom you can poll the people that are there. So anonymously you can, you know, say what you think is correct, and so I can figure out if only 50% know the correct answer. I can talk about it. So it's a really nice and easy way. There's a whole brain model series that I've done, and now I'm moving into, like, we're starting literally now in March. I've got on Wednesday I've got my last platinum of the way we were doing it before, and now I'm moving into the neuro integration level 2. So going into more of the neuroscience and connecting the neuroscience in these different topics. Everything I've touched on, like, we'll go into it to a deeper level, especially the pain and how the emotions go into it, and how the networks and how they function, and moving into this neuro integration for practice. So still for practitioners, but, you know, if you just were you know, and another thing we've done just for the other end of the spectrum, for those that don't really want to learn or do anything, but they know they should share the right information, we've started a bronze membership as well. So we've got bronze, gold, and platinum. We're dropping the silver. And for the bronze, they just get a QR code for their office, and the patient, they don't have to do anything other than, you know, direct the patients to the QR code, and the patients can go in and answer a couple of questions, and they get the access to the information, you know, for themselves. Awesome. So we figured out that, you know, most people just don't care. But there are people out there like you guys that have questions and really want to take the deep dive. So that's why we've got the full spectrum.
You mentioned the default state of the brain.
Yes.
And I want to learn a little bit more from you, Heidi, there. Do you think that there is a state where, so the brain is not learning all the time in the same intensity? Is that what you're saying? And that proprioception kicks on this integrative state where it tries to learn more?
It's not just proprioceptive information, right? If you think about an adjustment, you've got a very specific bombardation from one particular area of the spine that blasts the brain. So when this came out, and this, you know, 10, 15 years ago, again at neuroscience conferences, this is why I go, right? Because I want to keep up with the latest neuroscience. And they started talking about, because, in the 80s, we realized that the brain changes. It's adapting and changing. And I thought it was just always adapting and changing all the time, which is probably what's written in my book, which is something I need to fix in my new upcoming book, which is almost there. Anyway, so when I started to hear them saying the brain doesn't learn all the time, it doesn't learn. Yes. You actually need a set of, there's 3 key things that you need to learn and change for the brain to change. You need a bit of stress. So the sympathetic nervous system or cortisol system has to be activated. Like you could do a cold plunge or exercise or whatever, something that sets your body into a bit of stress. You need focus. So you need attention directed at it. And then you need sleep. You need deep sleep and REM sleep to consolidate what you've learned. So it's really interesting. So when they started saying the brain isn't always adapting all the time, I'm like, what do you mean? And I didn't really fully appreciate it until I started reading about that default mode. So what the brain does, if it was always fully paying attention to all information coming in, you would be exhausted. Like you just couldn't function.
Yes.
So what the brain does is that it creates its own story of reality, and it operates there, and that's the default mode. So it operates within its own reality of what's going on. So if you're subluxated and you've been subluxated for 10 years, God knows how screwed up that story is. And this is where that subluxated state is changing your understanding of who you are, who other people are, how you function. And then you get this little signal. And I always like to say that the adjustment to me sets off the salience network. And to explain the salience network, this is why the brain pays attention. Like, if you think about it, if you were in a room right now and the fire alarm went off, it's just a sound, but it's a sound with meaning. And the meaning is, get out of there right now, yeah? So the salience network switches on, shit, what's going on? I need to get out of here. Is there any smoke? Where could I go, right? The brain pays attention. So that's a learning episode, potentially. The other thing is, imagine you have irritable bowel syndrome and you suddenly get the urge to go to the bathroom. Again, it's just a sensation coming from inside your body, but you're going to get the hell out of there because you do not want to shit yourself in front of other people. Yeah? Again, it's just a sensation. So if we come in there with that rapid adjustment, and we've actually measured with autonomic measurements, and we find that when we're doing a manual adjustment, one of those rapid manual adjustments, you set off the sympathetic nervous system. But when I do cranial work, it actually sets off the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's another aside, again, not published yet, so I'm just letting you in on some of the latest secrets. But I think that fast thrust wakes up that salience network. It goes, what is this? And what do I need to do about it? And because of that, it enables the brain to reset, recalibrate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Correct.
Exactly.
things.
That's very important. Yeah. It's very important.
And then
I think
it can change the default mode. And we know it does because we've seen it. We've also seen in our latest, we've done 2 16-week clinical trials. And again, we now know we don't just change the default mode, we're changing the salience network, the central executive, the functional networks, as well as the default mode networks, both immediately after the first adjustment, as well as after, the 4 weeks of care in the UK study and 6 and 12 weeks of care and even still there after 16 weeks, there's still changes in the 2 clinical trials that we did, and they were in subclinical people, and the UK study was in chronic pain people. So just really, really interesting stuff.
Is there some kind of prerequisite you need, and what are the clinical signs of somebody needing to be adjusted? And I know I'm starting to touch research gaps here, but Heidi, let me know your thoughts on that. I know that might be the greatest research gap on chiropractic, how to apply and when to apply, because what I know is that most chiropractic researchers, they find a way around this question. I know that because I also did that in my PhD thesis. I was trying to avoid this question, and I really sincerely hoped that nobody would ask it. So how do you apply? How do you know where to apply? And how do you know when to apply? Who is qualifying as a patient?
Remind me about the research gaps, because I want to dive into the first question, because I think it's a brilliant question. And I appreciate it, because again, funnily enough, I've thought about this for a very long time. What I think we'll find, our patients are on a spectrum. So patients are on a spectrum from completely healthy to chronic problems. And it actually, I think, fits very well with what's known as the stress spectrum. There is such a thing as a stress spectrum, that physiological stress, I'm talking about psychological, physical, spiritual, mental, any kind of stress, if it's there over and over, constant, without relief, it pushes you down the stress spectrum. So in theory, David, yes, there will be people on the healthy side, because by definition, then they're not subluxated. Yeah? Because that's what healthy is. To me, health isn't just the absence of symptoms. That's just bullshit. Because we know that you're almost a third of the way down the stress spectrum before you even have symptoms.
Even the
so in that gap between
completely
healthy and symptoms start to appear, there's a whole lot of stuff we know, we can measure it. So you might start to have some metabolic changes and some insulin resistance, and there might be all sorts of things that are subclinical, they're under the radar. So they are my people in the subclinical category because they hover around the symptom threshold. Yeah? So then I know they're not healthy, I know they're hovering around the symptom threshold, which is brilliant because I know there's some dysfunction there. And then they go further down and you get worse and worse, and you get more and more metabolic symptoms, you get more and more problems with what we know now is all prefrontal cortex functions, all of the logical thinking and reasoning and intelligence and all that. They start forgetting words. They usually end up with more and more gut problems. There's usually more and more emotional, mental systems. So anxiety, depression might start to come up. Addictions, they might start to have pain. They might start to have more chronic pain. They might then be on medications and all kinds of things. And then they go right down to the full-blown diseases and disorders. This is still simplified, okay? This is still simplified.
Of course.
So if someone's there with a full-blown disease or disorder, they're right down the opposite end of the spectrum. Now, will they respond? Because you mentioned responders and non-responders, which I also think is a fascinating topic. And I've been looking into this.
Oh, yeah.
Because just because they're not responding in the first 6 weeks, does that mean that they shouldn't get adjusted? I'm not sure about that. I don't think that that's correct. Because again, look at Kelly Holt's PhD research. I was his supervisor. I wish I could take credit for the man's genius, but I can't really. He did the whole thing himself. All I needed to do is point him in the right direction, but I still like to try and take credit. I was his PhD co-supervisor, but you know what I mean? Yeah. But anyway, so what he found was that, say for example, the stepping task he did older adults. He had 60 older adults. Half got chiropractic care, half did not get chiropractic care. And then we were looking at all these different measures that were relevant for falls in the elderly. One of the tasks, actually, first two, joint position sense, it improved we measured at 0 weeks, at 4 weeks, and at 12 weeks. So at 4 weeks, the joint position sense was significantly improved in the older adults. No chiropractor adjusted an ankle. No one touched an ankle. So this is checking and adjusting subluxations in the spine, enables the brain to more accurately know what's going on in the ankle joint.
Yes.
Awesome, 4 weeks of care. Okay, what about the sound vision illusion? What we know is older adults can't multimodally integrate fast enough. So they sort of, they integrate sound, and then they integrate the visual input, and then they try and put it together, whereas we do it all at the same time. And especially those older adults at risk of falls have this prolonged multimodal integration, and they get it wrong, and so that's why they can't respond fast enough, and so they end up with a fall. So again, that was improved significantly by 4 weeks. Phenomenal, right? But both of those are perceptions. But then he had another task, and this task was you stood on a panel, and there was 2 lights that could go on in front of the foot, either feet, and 2 on the side. So that 1 light would go on either in front of or beside the right foot, or in front of or beside the left foot. Depending on the light, you had to make a choice. So you had to perceive the light, make a choice which foot to move, and make a choice which direction to move that foot, and then move that foot. See how that's multimodal integration, but not just perception. Now you're also including muscle movement as well. At 4 weeks, there was no difference between the groups. None. 0. But at 12 weeks, massive difference. So something happened, and so big that it's better than the 6-month physical exercise intervention that is currently recommended. Yes. 3 weeks of chiropractic care way outshone that the outcomes were much better than 6 months of exercise. So there's something that's going on, but it didn't show up at the 4 weeks, and we haven't measured longer than that. So what happens after that? You know what I mean? This is where like, I just don't think we should be so arrogant as to say this is the case or this is the case. I think if we have a lot of evidence, we can say this is the case. But when we don't have a lot of evidence, I think we should be smart enough to shut the fuck up and not have more than a curious interest in doing some research around that topic. Some people's brains are more able to be plastic, to change compared to others. So you can actually measure the degree of plasticity that a person's brain has. So when you say they're non-responder, it could just be that they're a slow responder. And I'm not saying that there aren't people that don't need to see us. I agree. I agree with that. That there could be
Chestnut
people
said that. Yeah, slow responder.
It's not the proprioceptive input from the spine that they need the most, right? Because that is just one component to whatever they've got that's troubling them.
Oh,
Absolutely.
so thankful. Yes.
So, no problem with that at all. But I don't think that we should automatically take a slow responder, for example, and just deny them the possibility of being able to retrain their brain just because. But what we might get to is a time where we could actually measure how plastic is your brain when you start chiropractic care. So you're not just a responder, but we might know up front, okay, your brain is not very plastic, so you're going to be a slow responder if you respond at all, and it depends on what your outcomes are. So like if you want the brain, like, and I also think, like I checked people. So I didn't get that far, but in the really healthy stage, I checked people because when we were students, we had to go and do spinal screenings, and I checked people for if they've got dysfunction in the spine, talked about chiropractic, whatever. I met people, and I've also met these people that fit into that healthy category that have never had any pain, aches, or tension ever. I have met people that don't have a problem with their spine. And often I'd ask them, like, who are you? You're weird. Like, I wouldn't say that, but actually I would. Because I have a problem of just being quite authentic. But I would ask them, what do you do? How, your spine, I've never felt a spine so great. And they tended to be like black belt taekwondo instructors, or they were, yoga yogis, yoga instructors, or they were like really into being aware of their body. And I couldn't find subluxations on them. There was like just remarkable. So can you be that person? Yes. Can you be a person? Like, I'll give you another example. When we talk about responders and non-responders, some may just be slow to respond, but there could be some benefit from chiropractic care, but some are going to be non-responders no matter what. Say, for example, your outcome was stress urinary incontinence in women, right? This happens when they cough, sneeze, jump, and they pee themselves, right? Because that can be because your deep and superficial pelvic floor muscles aren't contracting in an ideal way. So if that's the case, and that's the cause of the stress urinary incontinence, then I'm sure that adjusting is going to help because it clears up that brain-body communication. There's a potential there for benefit, right? And we've done studies on this, which is interesting. But another reason you can have stress urinary incontinence is what's called an avulsion fracture. So giving birth can be a bit traumatic, and it can literally rip the bone off the pelvic rim. Now, no amount of adjustments is ever going to glue that back on again. Surgery could, right? This is where, again, we shouldn't be fanatical about the adjusting subluxation is the only way to health. That's bullshit. If you could get adjusted all day, every day, but eat shit food, not exercise, have difficult relationships, you're not going to be healthy. Like, you just, like, health is more than just being subluxation free. So it's, again, David, a very complex discussion. But it's a very beautiful discussion to be had, and I think it's an important discussion to be had. And I don't like either end, because to me they're both stupid. Saying everybody needs to be adjusted at all times is stupid, and saying there are a lot of people that should never be adjusted because they don't respond within the first few weeks of care. Bullshit. Come on. Like, again, that's stupid. So I think both ends can be a bit fanatical, and that's okay. I mean, it just provides a little bit of politics and discussion. But this is where I think there should be more of an intelligent conversation where we look at different aspects, and maybe there's a bit of in between. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle where, like, again, can I skite about the New Zealand College of Chiropractic, because I'm so proud of where this college has gotten to. Like, just recently, my boss, the president, was asking me, so Heidi, can you just come along, because I need you to meet with the head of technique and the head of philosophy and you guys, you researchers, and we want to have a conversation around how often should we see patients For how long should we see patients?
Crazy.
And what's a good indication for needing more care, more frequent care or less frequent care? And we had this beautiful conversation, beautiful. I presented the research on the topic of, higher frequency care early on, is usually good, and Mitch Haas's work and shows that even up to a year later they benefit. And then we did Eklund's study and looked at maintenance care, that once you've got them and they're responding well and you've got them to a certain good level, then maintenance care, actually you end up with less days of pain after a year. And then they were discussing it from the technique perspective and discussing it from the philosophy perspective. And between the three of us, we came up with this beautiful way of us deciding, well, the initial phase of care should be more frequent for the first, say, 12 weeks, but they should be assessed at 6 weeks and at 12 weeks, full assessment, looking at everything. If they're not responding by that 12-week period, then, we have that conversation that maybe it's continuing, or maybe there are other reasons for their particular problem, so that they have an informed decision. They can stop care if they like, whatever. They can, of course, stop any time. There's never a pressure at the New Zealand College.
That is very important. Never a pressure, yeah.
Never. I mean, evidence-based practice is the evidence, the clinical experience, and the patient preferences. You should just honor them. So then we had the conversation, well, when can you reduce care? When are you in a different state? So we had this fantastic conversation around, well, it seems to be that stressors in your life can cause more subluxations. So if they're under a lot of pressure or stress or have had a physical injury or emotional trauma, then that would be an indication to keep it at a higher level, right? Or if they are responding really well, their subluxations are no longer showing up the same, so they've kind of shifted, their pattern of existence has shifted, then that's a good indication to reduce the frequency of care. And then we work it like that, and then again we assess and reassess, so there's a full reassessment. But I just like this conversation that takes place between the philosophy, the science, the art, and we decide together. I'm not so arrogant as to think that research is the only answer. And if we haven't done the research, that's as dumb as saying, well, before we discovered viruses, they didn't exist. I mean, like, bullshit.
Yes.
It's
it
just
is very hard.
We haven't done it yet.
It is a very hard thing to make, the body is a non-linear system. I tried for quite a long time to determine which patient is right and which patient is wrong. And there are so many factors to contribute to that.
And again, it comes back to the overwhelming state a clinician has to work within. Because not only are they dealing with their patient's worldview, but you've got your own worldview, you've got to make all these decisions. It's
and
rough.
The professional things.
No wonder they want to simplify it, make some recipes, not have to think. I totally get it, because they'll have their own lives too. And I don't know about you, but my life is completely fucked up, most of the time. So you've got all of that shit to deal with on top of, at least I can deal with facts at work. You know what I mean? Like that. That's easy for me. But these poor clinicians, honestly, I feel so for them. And I get an awful lot out of talking to the clinicians too. Like at conferences, I have great conversations. I get a lot of my research ideas from some of these guys too. Because I am more research now. I've been full-time research for at least the last 15 years. But to begin with, early in my career, I practiced. So the first 10 years. So I had more hands-on, and it's those experiences with patients that are non-linear, that don't fit the textbooks, that have these weird and wonderful things happen to them, and the feedback they give you. I think most clinicians are actually observational scientists, because if they genuinely pay attention, they're observing what works and what doesn't work, and they're coming up with theories and thoughts about it, which is where I just do because often the people that come back to you in clinic are the ones that are responding well to you anyway. So they self-select. So you see what works. You see what works. And that's why you need the scientists like us, and you, obviously, to be able to have the proper randomized controlled trials, or the proper designs that take into account those people that self-select out of the chiropractic care because for whatever reason. And it could be that it's the wrong chiropractor, it could be the wrong technique. One thing we're looking at the moment is that the state you're in when you're getting adjusted probably matters an awful lot. And on top of that, David and Alex, the state the chiropractor is in probably matters. We're starting to do what's called hyperscanning studies, where we're measuring whole head EEG from both the chiropractor and the patient at
No
the same
way.
time. Because
Cool.
I am convinced that there's something about the interaction clinically that is important. And I think, to me, that's like your intent, you're being present, you're tuning into the patient, or not giving a shit. And I think this is really important. And like, imagine if this is true, then the doctors who are trained, and I've got nothing against doctors, my dad's a doctor, my brother's a doctor, but they're trained to not give a shit. Yeah? Because that's part of their natural training, because it's too hard, because they're dealing with the dying anyway, and patients die, right? So it's a reality they have to cope with. So for them to cope, it's better just not to care, right?
Yes.
We chiropractors operate differently. We often really do give a shit. And I think there's something in that caring and giving a shit about what's going on for you and your patient, and that interaction that takes place, I think impacts the outcomes of your adjustments. So there might be something there too. So this is why it's such a complex topic. You can't break it down and simplify it. There are no one rule fits all.
No.
It can't be.
Yeah, my last question, Heidi, for today is it possible for athletes that what we do in the spine increases their ability to integrate maybe exercises that they do, like using this burst effect for their training and making it more specific?
Yeah.
Like, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I've actually, funnily enough, it's weird you ask, because I've literally, for my Platinum members, I've literally just gone through the sports research in the last couple of Platinum Live sessions that I've been doing. So just, funnily enough. And so I've just got all the latest papers are on top of my mind. But I think there's multiple ways that chiropractic care can help sports people. Like, for example, there's so many studies now that show that we increase voluntary maximum contractions. So basically, we make them stronger, not because we do anything magic, but we enable the brain to more efficiently produce force. So that's number one. We can also prevent fatigue developing over strong contractions. Again, that's going to be helpful. But we're also making their body more aware. So if we're enabling them to be more accurately aware of what's going on, that's what I was talking about before, arms and legs attached to the spine. So no motor control signals, no muscle contraction signals are going to be sent to an arm and a leg without its awareness and an accurate awareness of where the spine is going to matter. It's always going to matter. Yep. So if you are subluxated, you could be exercising your muscles in a non-optimal way because you may be sending the wrong contraction messages to those muscles. What happens in those cases? Overuse injuries. Microtrauma upon microtrauma upon microtrauma upon microtrauma, and they get pain. Pain develops because, like, if I bang my head against a brick wall once, it's okay, I'll get away with it. But 1,000 times, I'm going to get swelling, tenderness, pain. So people talk about golfer's elbow and, tennis elbow and, golfer's elbow. It's not necessarily the elbow that's the problem. It could be that the brain isn't aware of where the core of the spine is because the arm attaches via the ribs to the spine. So you got to be aware of that. So that awareness, I think, is a big thing. And I mean, that could also be that you might need to adjust the elbow or the knee or whatever's, also painful. I'm not saying don't do that. If it's clinically indicated, do that, but don't forget the spine. It's like the core.
No, of course.
So you've got that awareness. We know reaction times speed up, Alex. So being able to respond quick. We know that from the military studies, for example, the whole body reaction times, even in highly trained elite military special forces, their whole body reaction time speeds up. This is really cool shit.
Yep.
So again, depending on if they've got bowel problems, then they've probably got low back problems without even really knowing about it. If they've got family trouble at home, if they imagine if they've got a really nasty relationship, could be like some sort of borderline personality disorder, narcissist, whatever. But these people exist out there. If these poor athletes are living with someone like that, they're going to be constantly fucked up. And then that could be causing more subluxations and enabling their body not to optimally perform. So there's so many ways. We know that, like sleep was brought up by David. 40% of people will respond and say, I sleep better. And I reckon that sleeping better is part of the effect of the adjustment recalibrating. Because remember we talked about what you need for changes in the brain? You need focus. Yep. Right, well, if you're getting adjusted, you're focusing. And if that sets off the sympathetic nervous system because it's a bit of a fight and flight thing, you get the sympathetic activation, and then they need to sleep. So it fits perfectly, right? That as they're... So to me, this I also think breathing, Alex, breathing for sports people, right? Like, the spine, what attaches to the spine? It's our ribs, our diaphragm, right? And I don't know about you, but I mean, again, you can just take a big deep breath after you've been properly adjusted, because all your neck muscles too that lift the rib cage. I mean, it makes so much sense that, again, it's just not something that we've studied yet.
Yep.
But so there's so many avenues through which you could have a sports performance or injury prevention. Not that there's many studies on it clinically yet. I'm well aware of that. But we've got so many reasons for it. Like, again, if you look at Stu McGill and Kolowicki's research, and it's phenomenal work on why the spine is so important, why the muscle contraction patterns are so important for spinal stability. You know, this is really key because the spine itself is inherently very unstable as a structure.
Yeah.
So you need the muscles and your ligaments and things you need your muscles to contract in the right way, in correct patterns. For example, if you lift your arm up, you know, if you didn't switch on your core muscles, especially on the opposite side of where the arm's going up, you would fall over. And if you don't do that, and we know a lot of people with chronic back problems, they don't have this feed forward activating of the core muscles when you lift your arms up. So, and Kolowicki and their team, they even tested athletes at the beginning of a term and followed them for a couple of years and looked at the people, the young, healthy, physical athletes. They looked at the people that could switch on and off their core muscles appropriately at the beginning of the study, and they accurately predicted which of those college athletes would end up with an injury. Like that's just remarkable. So this brain's ability to sense what's going on in the spine and control the movement of the spine and arms is absolutely essential for injury prevention. And I just think that we just haven't been able to study this yet, but we're trying to get there. Believe you me, I'm working as hard as I can. I've got 35 people now in that research center. Yes. And again, back to your question earlier, David, what does it take to be a researcher? There is so much we don't know. I could spend 10 times longer talking about what we don't know than I could talking about what we do know. Yes. And I could talk for days about what we do know. So I could talk for months about what we don't know. Like, all you need is a driving passion to want to understand more, to have better explanations, to actually figure out, well, can we test that then? Let's test that. Let's see if we adjust people. Are they then better able to switch on and on their core muscles? There's one paper that indicates that we can. Again, Bernadette Murphy and Paul Marshall. Paul Marshall did his PhD with me, and so I know him very well. And they literally looked at college students' ability to switch their core muscles on when you rapidly raise your arm up. And in the people that couldn't do it, where it's like the arm goes up and the brain goes, oh my God, my arm's going up, shit, I've got to switch on my core muscles. So it's behind the switching on. Bernie adjusted their subluxated sacroiliac joint, just the sacroiliac joint, but there was a 48%, I think, increase in the ability to feed forward activate. And some people that were completely reactive became feed forward. So they switched on their core muscles before they lifted their arm up, when they'd been the complete opposite before, at the beginning of the study. So there's so many reasons. And again, I could go on even more just because I've just recently covered the topic.
Is there some instance in my office, and this is non-scientific, this is just experience, I solve it by starting in low intensity adjustments and increasing intensity. Would you agree to that? Or is there, any other way? I mean,
multiple thoughts have popped into my mind. First and foremost, what I've learned is where a patient is at on the stress scale. If a patient is down the bad end of the stress scale, overloaded, lots of symptoms, diagnoses, all the rest of it, their capacity to adapt is minimized. That's why heart rate variability is so important, for example. So if they are really stressed out, if they're up the healthier end, they can adapt more. Their capacity. Yes. So there is a maximum computational capacity within the central nervous system, 100%. Yes. And so you can overload them. I was a bit like you. I don't know if you were, I was very eager and I wanted my patients better yesterday. And so I would go in and do all this, as much as I could on the person on the day. And I discovered, to my detriment, that that's not necessarily a good thing for everybody. I also know, and I'm well aware, that you can harm people, and not necessarily just and not necessarily just structural. You asked about that, like not just to the structure, to the low back, to the discs. A friend of mine was telling me about one of his early patients who came under chiropractic care and then stopped care very abruptly. And my friend called him up and said, what's the problem? He was a student at the time, so not necessarily as tuned in, right? And not necessarily as, emotionally aware. And the patient said, look, I had a really, really bad depression, 20 years ago, but I've been fine. But the day I walked out of your office last time, I just felt it come back, just descended over me again. So, and that's not a normal reaction, obviously, but could we do some harm? I think it's possible. I think also, though, at the same time, I just want to put this out there, I think most of us, accidentally get people better. Because I don't think we've figured out yet what's, ideal circumstances. Yeah. But just like you, now I've learned with the stress scale that if they're down the dark end of the stress scale, I go in gentle. I even like to use muscle testing. I don't know what your thoughts are on muscle testing, but to me, it's like a language between two bodies. And to me, it's like I'm asking their body what to do. And I'm bypassing our educated brains, because our educated brains get things wrong all the time, right? But if I'm just innate to innate asking, what do you need from me today? And it just becomes so accurate that I honor that, and that seemed to give me the best results. But again, I'm talking as a clinician there, right? Scientifically, do we have any evidence for any of this? No. So this comes down to, again, us thinking as human beings, you've got to be aware of the red flags. You've got to be aware of the red flags. Red flags, medical red flags, you've got to pause and think, because you could kill people too, right?
If
they don't have the proper ligaments at the top of the neck, and if they've got these, connective tissue disorders, you could cause harm.
Degeneration, of course. Degeneration is a structural problem that is enabling.
There are ways that we can also adapt care. We can adapt care.
Yeah.
Like we can, we can use activated we can use like more, gentler mechanisms. You can just do 1 or 2 adjustments and not 10. I'm not really a big fan of the, crack, and send you out the door. I personally prefer people that will test and check and just adjust what they feel on that day I need. To me, I seem to respond better to that. But I think, again, depends on where you are. I'm definitely down the stress scale end, the bad end. Whereas other people could function really well and would be fabulous with the crack 'em and rack 'em and crunch, and they're fantastic. So I don't know, like I can't answer that. But I think there are pros and cons, and I think we've got to be careful. We've got to think of red flags. Yet I think also, like for example, in Kelly Holt's study again, like we had all these different chiropractors provide care, and completely different methods, like from activated technique to, no, maybe not activated. They were doing Gonstead, or they did drop piece, or they, it didn't seem to matter. Like they all got better. But I do think too, in this mix, I think skill level matters. So how much of a master you've become. Like if you're showing off, and doing a show adjustment, I don't think that's a good thing for the person getting that adjustment, because I think again that connection between the chiropractor and the patient matters. So I think that's important. I think where you're at matters. I think where the chiropractor is at matters. I think whether you're tuning in, like, do you get that gut feeling sometimes with a person, like, I'm only going to do this today, and I'm just going to leave that one now and see how that goes. So whereas other people, I would probably still go in and do quite a bit more. So it's so individual again. Comes back to that art, doesn't it? And we're not there yet. The science hasn't caught up with what clinicians observe, which is why we shouldn't call them fuckwits either. Like they're very intelligent, beings with great skill and experience. They are. And as scientists, we shouldn't be arrogant enough to think that we know best. We should communicate together and have these conversations and say, what do you find in practice? Oh, that's interesting. Maybe we could design a study around that. What do you think matters? Can we test that? And then that's how I see us working together.
And of course, just listen to your patient. What I realized during my time as, an observer of chiropractic, it is for a chiropractor very challenging when somebody after 1 or 2 adjustments is coming in and telling you that he is or she is feeling worse than before. They cannot walk straight, they are in terrible pain, and you cannot, tell me that in nature the chances of survival would be increased by that. So a very important thing for chiropractors is just listen and acknowledge the fact that you could do harm, and you have to accustom your adjustments according to that phenomenon. It is not just like, hey, sell 20 appointments and whatever is occurring during that way is totally not interesting. Just keep adjusting.
Please, can I say one thing, David? But I just do not want to be associated with that kind of unethical behavior.
No.
That to me is just people are after money, and it's not.
No, it's ignorance. It is simply ignorance. It is the same ignorance that the medical community provides when saying something like you talked when we had our first call. It was 2 years ago, and you were talking to me about political shit show, and I'm not getting specific here, but science sometimes can be political shit show.
Yes, it can.
Because this is a quote from Trisha Greenhall, who said, the best scientists in the world do not know what they research about, and all the others have an agenda. And in parts, particular, I agree with that, because of course, if you do a study, you prefer a certain outcome. And yeah,
I was quite lucky there, though. Can I stop you there?
Yes.
Because I do consider myself a bit blessed. I don't think I'm, this amazing scientist, but I was a bit lucky that I really didn't care how chiropractic care worked. I just wanted to know. So it didn't bother me whether it was this way or that way. So in a way, I didn't have an ego tied up in the answer. I just wanted to understand. So I think it was a blessing for me. And so when I do get a little shitty with these arrogant academics out there that are so dogmatic. They're more dogmatic than the other side sometimes, in my opinion. But I was lucky. It didn't matter to me what my results were, because if it didn't work that way, I'll find another way. I just keep looking.
That is very important.
I didn't have the ego tied into it. Yeah.
I mean, Alex and I, and especially Alex was the person who brought me back to chiropractic, because, I was trained as a believer, not as a researcher. Yeah. And when I started clinic, I was disappointed, because I was trained as somebody who thought that adjusting somebody would cure everything.
I know.
A cold to cancer. And anytime I asked a question to that, I was claimed to be a non-believer. Alex, it was to a point, it went to a point that I was willing to quit chiropractic. Alex brought me back.
Go, Alex.
Alex did that. Without Alex, I wouldn't be a chiropractor anymore. And he brought me
the PhD
to
now.
Asking questions. He brought me to
a point all the way.
Asking questions.
I know.
It was hard. And he brought me
I recognized a fellow fanatic.
He's way more fanatic than I am, but in a positive way. You're
the fanatic, David. Sorry to say it, but you're the one that's gone all the way. You've gone all the way. You've done a PhD. You're putting it to the test. You're just not letting us go. And I understand what it's like to be in that threatening environment, because it's really rough. And the sad thing is too, David, that when you're under threat, your creativity is turned off. So that's also a really sad thing, because if you're like, because part of science is being criticized and critiqued, right? But that can feel very threatening, and then your creativity can be stifled from that. So to me, you've got to find the right balance between safety, like your ideas can be criticized, but not you as a human being, right? And I think this is where, like, I understand. I went through the same thing you went through. I went through the only other I had two other chiropractors at the whole of Auckland University when I went through. One was my supervisor, and so I understand what it's like to be in that world, which is why, again, I'm so excited about the New Zealand College. This has turned into I'm loving New Zealand College, but we're actually going through an accreditation process right now to start up a master's program, or like a real master's program, and then within maybe 3 years of the master's successfully being run and defended, to start a PhD program, because we have enough science now. We have enough science to actually study chiropractic questions, we can still criticize the methodology and the interpretation and the statistics and the design, but we don't criticize the people. So again, within our lab, like it should be a non-threatening environment so they can be creative. They can come out with ideas. So we never try and slag off any idea, but we just look at the methods. So are you actually addressing what you think you're addressing? And so I'm so excited about leaving that as a bit of a legacy for me, is to set up a pathway for people like you, David, because there'll be more out there, believe you me. There's more of us weirdos out there that actually want to answer questions that are driven by it. But imagine if they could study the chiropractic science and not have to spend half their time justifying their existence, right? Because you know what that's like. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's half your energy went into that. Imagine if your entire energy could have gone into asking research questions, chiropractic research questions, and not having to justify yourself, just justifying the science. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? Imagine that.
Yes.
So that's something that I'm so proud of that we're doing. Again, it took me a long time. I figured, well, if we don't do it, who the hell is going to do it? And again, we already have like 15 to 20 master students that actually come from all over Europe and do their project with us. So we're already operating as masters supervisors like that. We already found. We even have PhD students. Not only do we have PhD students, we have postdocs work in our lab. So it's like we're already operating at that level, but I hadn't clicked that, why don't we go through? This is where, again, I have a great team. So, our president was thinking very differently and said, well, we should set up our own master's program here. It's going to be a really still rigorous process. And then once we've proven ourselves there, let's do the PhD as well. Because can you imagine what we could achieve if we've got more of us, David, who want to do this kind of stuff, but in a nurturing environment instead of having to fucking justify your existence.